Start Over Strong, Life After a DUI, a podcast for people, not offenders. Brought to you by Smart Start, the nation's most trusted, judgment-free ignition interlock provider.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is Stigma Free IID. I'm Morgan Ryan.
And I'm Izzy Varela.
Today we are having a follow-up episode around weed gummies, marijuana, and alcohol. We've pretty much seen weed gummies everywhere, and today we're going to educate you on some of the things that we may not know.
Yeah, I think a lot of people assume that they're safe just because they're legal, and that's not necessarily the case.
Yes, in fact, one of the things I wanted to start with was something called Cannabis Use Disorder. Now, CUD, not to be confused with AUD, which is alcohol use disorder, is actually a disorder of addiction, which is defined from the use of cannabis. Now, here's the rough benchmark here. This is a pretty alarming statistic. 30% of cannabis users may develop some level of cannabis use disorder compared to alcohol, which is only 10 to 15%. So when we're thinking about substances in general, between marijuana and alcohol, generally speaking, 30% can become addicted to cannabis versus only half that, 10 to 15% becoming addicted to alcohol. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was actually surprised by that metric, really kind of double, really, if you think about it. So, and then from a timing perspective, the availability and the legality of marijuana hasn't been around that long, right? So you're talking about timing and then almost double the amount of people that can develop a disorder or an addiction.
Yeah, and I think through the legalization of marijuana and the education of society, I say often we need to stop treating marijuana as this stepsister substance that we look down upon. In many states, it is legal, and a substance is a substance. Alcohol is legal, and so is marijuana. Marijuana is not evil, and alcohol is not evil. But I think alcohol is more socially acceptable. Wouldn't you agree?
I think right now it is. Do I feel that changing? I do. I think kind of going back to our last episode, we think about the availability, the packaging, the way things are, how easy it is to consume. It's becoming a little bit more socially acceptable. I think some states are probably ahead of others, or some areas are ahead of others, but there is still more of a stigma on marijuana than there has been on alcohol. Alcohol is you can consume it in front of people and they're not going to judge you.
Yeah. Well, I think potency is really important too, if we just get right into the meat and potatoes here. Generally speaking, even myself, when it comes to certain versions of alcohol, I still don't understand my limits. If I've never consumed a lot of whiskey or bourbon or things of that nature, or if it's been a series of years that I haven't consumed it because I've been a mother or
you
breastfeeding.
Ate differently, or you worked out differently, or definitely a lot of different things that can happen when you're consuming, just based on your metabolism or your size or what you're actually consuming, right?
Yeah, we talk a lot about metabolism and working out, input, output, and alcohol, which is a poison technically. There is sort of this health halo around marijuana and cannabis being a more healthier option. There is that sort of wellness halo. Let's talk about potency with THC.
Yeah, so there's some nuances. So there is risk for higher THC potency. Frequent use, the more you use it, and then starting younger, right? So I think with that, there is just a whole lot to understand. There's a whole lot of nuance that we're trying to figure out. I think it's relatively new to a lot of people. People are, I think we're at that second wave where there's early adopters to marijuana, THC, edibles as a substitute, and now that second wave of people are kind of just uncovering that's an option. And so that leads to poly use, like we talked about last time.
Yeah.
And it also leads to that exposure at an early age, which we'll talk about a little bit more, but that it's still a lot different for young users than it is for older users, right? Consuming marijuana at a young age, there are studies that show that it can be detrimental to brain development. So I'm very aware of that because I have young kids. So I think that's something really important to consider.
Yeah, and I think potency and early use, we've seen early use in general when it comes to a substance like alcohol, and that does include cannabis. The earlier the use, the more likely you are to develop an addiction. The thing about marijuana that's so interesting to me in these statistics is that you can still develop an addiction and a dependency. The difference is it just happens to the body differently. I do think as well that consumption of THC is basically, it's different, right? It's sort of like you're using it more frequently. You're not only using it more frequently, but you're consuming it differently and in a version in a variety of ways. It's in a can. It's in the form of a gummy. I don't think most people nowadays, which I know they still do, buy bud and physically roll it and break it up and grind it and put it into, a bowl or whatever mechanism they're using to smoke it. Those different avenues of, I believe you said that there's no barriers anymore.
No, there isn't. And I think that's the biggest thing is like the way that it used to be done 15, 20 years ago has changed, right? Yeah, maybe people used to kind of home kitchen some pot brownies in there before a show or something.
Yes.
But now it's already prepackaged, pre-measured. You have calorie count on it. You have sugar content on it. It's crazy. And then there's the way that you know how much THC is actually in that, and you're kind of taking it on faith, right? How that'll happen. So people will consume it. They wonder how long the effects take to actually happen. It's packaged in a way that's attractive to people of all ages. It's not, I
can just take it off the shelf. I can just pick it up and take it off the shelf.
Absolutely.
And it's the THC levels today are significantly higher than in the past. So I'm going to read some statistics. In the 90s, cannabis generally had anywhere from 2 to 5% THC. Today, we often see 15 to 30% plus THC in products. And edibles can also contain much higher total THC per package. So the implication here in this comparison between what it used to be versus what it is today, it's not even a little bit close to the same thing in terms of potency, which obviously can lead to things like addiction and other dependencies on alcohol.
Exactly, yeah. They're comparing to products from years ago, what they used to use a long time ago, and it's just not the same thing anymore. There's new potencies, there's new strains, there's new levels of THC. I feel like sometimes they're trying to outdo each other.
They are totally trying to outdo each other. And we have another episode coming where we're going to talk about mass and specifically a gummy, the mass of a gummy, and the rules and laws around the 0.3% THC that is physically in a gummy, things like gelatin, where the THC is dispersed within a gummy when you start physically cutting these things up yourself. And then it really doesn't matter what's on the label because you may know the calorie count, you may read that, but the way that you're consuming it, if you're consuming it outside of what it's telling you, which, I've seen people ripping them in half multiple times. This is a common thing. Have you seen that too?
Yeah, taking a bite and passing the other one to.
And who knows that I'm getting all of it and you're getting none of it.
I could get the 1%, you'd get this.
Yeah, and there
9%.
goes Morgan, and she's, see you later.
Exactly.
And again, I think, I do encourage following the label, reading the label that is there, especially medicinally and recreationally if you're using it in that way. As we know, that's what substances are generally used to do. But I want to talk about mental health and this overlap between those that do use it medicinally and maybe the implications on mental health, because I think this is overlooked.
Yeah, I think this is a really important part to me, just because I think people think of it now a lot more as it's benign. It's an alternative to other substances. People use it as a way to wean themselves off of alcohol or other substances to something that's viewed as healthier. But there's a lot of implications on mental health. Like THC's already been linked to anxiety, panic attacks, paranoia. I've seen this happen in person. For me, I'm also someone that chooses not to consume edibles for that reason, because it does have that effect on me. I do get the anxiety, the anxiousness. I'm already an anxious person. I don't need anything else to make me feel anxious.
No more paranoia.
No more paranoia. So those are the reasons I avoid. And I think that's a lot of people that need to be aware. They need to be self-aware of their mental state and how they feel and what these substances can do to them. In some cases, especially high doses, there can be psychosis-like symptoms.
Oh, that's terrible. I had no idea.
It does happen. Definitely, it is a person-by-person situation. It affects people differently. And I think that's the thing, is when people are creating, packaging, and selling these products, there's not a customization aspect much, really. It's basically, here it is, and, use at your own risk, figure out your own dosage, and that's a tough situation to be in because you don't know how it's going to affect you. Young users in particular, as we talked about, it does affect them in a different way. They're still developing a lot of parts of their brain. Consuming THC can be detrimental to that. Plus, it can affect them from a paranoia and anxiety standpoint. Those that have underlying mental health conditions, it will affect them differently. It tends to amplify those things. So if you're an anxious person and you're consuming cannabis products, you're probably going to be more anxious. If you have the propensity to have a panic attack and you're consuming a cannabis product, that can happen. Setting is very dependent on that as well, but it does happen. And there is something called greening out. So this is something I never really heard. You were going to talk to me a little bit about it, right? So can you talk to me a little bit about what greening out is?
Yeah. So greening out essentially is a similar notion when it comes to cannabis, like blacking out with alcohol. It's an overconsumption point of cannabis, generally speaking, in a short period of time. And there are a slew of symptoms that can happen when you green out. This would essentially be true for anybody, but especially younger users that are not aware of their tolerance levels, and they're not necessarily reading the label and consuming this in accordance with maybe their own body type. I've heard stories of groups of, teenagers being together, and even the difference between a male body and a female body, being friends and then consuming that, and then somebody ending up in a greening out situation. And those symptoms do include dizziness, nausea, extreme vomiting, and then ultimately extreme increase in paranoia, feeling like you're going to die.
Yeah, that's a terrible feeling. I think anyone that's been through that, if that's the kind of situation, you're like, or I'm never going to do this again. I just want this to end type feeling. So,
yeah.
And I think that's an important thing to distinguish is, again, these products make each individual feel different in a different way.
Yeah, and I do think delayed onset is really important. We in our last episode broke down the differences between CBD, CBG, and THC and what they meant. One is a psychoactive, one is not a psychoactive, another one is a version of both, and how you consume them in terms of delayed consumption as well. I talked about a mother and daughter that I follow on Instagram that I think are hilarious. They take gummies and bake things together, and you can see on the reel how it's a delayed reaction, and by the end it's difficult. It's impairment is impairment, right, essentially. Yeah. But I think when it comes to things like cannabis use, there is a delayed onset, which can actually cause you to take more because you don't feel it yet. So right. I think that's something we should be aware of.
Like,
as well.
I don't feel it, let me have another bite or another piece, and then that leads to higher dosage and probably really amplified feelings of paranoia or anxiety.
Yeah, which is ironic because these are specifically marketed to address paranoia and anxiety, and yet we see the substance itself causing those as direct symptoms in the end user.
Yeah, and yeah, this again can lead to panic-driven decisions. People have called emergency services before, right? Where they've been in situations where they feel like they need an ambulance, or in situations where they need medical assistance or medical help. Puts them in unsafe situations. Someone's out in public or trying to function normally. So most of these usage, or a lot of these usages, they happen in public settings, concerts, games, bars, whatever, right? And that does lead to a lot more difficulty processing the situation. So it is a pretty big problem.
Yeah, and I think that leads to the common denominator of this comparison between tolerance and effect and impact. And we see that with alcoholism and AUD. If you're consuming a glass of wine every day, you likely have a problem. If you want to reach a certain level of being buzzed or feeling relaxed or feeling essentially drunk, it's going to take you more alcohol over time to achieve that level of release, so to speak. And the same is true for cannabis. The same would be true. And so over time, you're going to consume more because you're not feeling the same effect. This would lead to increased consumption, stronger products. And then what we see, which is the doubling down. This is the poly use. And there is a massive statistic out there where I believe in the state of Colorado, the last I looked, it was like 80-something% of DWIs and DUIs in the state actually are poly users. So people are on the road doubling down with their gummies and their cannabis, and then obviously alcohol as well. And that's going to increase that impairment.
So the next point we're going to talk about a little bit is daily use versus occasional use. You talked about it a little bit. So occasional versus frequent use matters. Daily use dependence, cognitive impact, and the effects on that, the brain can be pretty notable. So regular use may affect memory, attention, and motivation. And this is especially relevant for people that are professionals, student, or in decision-making roles. I've seen this before, right? So it is definitely something where you can tell someone's increased their consumption before, they're a lot less motivated, sluggish, more prone to take time to make important decisions, or not willing to make important decisions because they don't feel like they need to. And then if you think about the setting where people are usually using THC, marijuana, as a way to calm anxiety or to relax, it is those important roles like professionals. You do see it in students pretty frequently. And those people that feel pressure for making decisions, they're usually able to, they do make the decision to consume either alcohol or THC, and it does make it even more difficult for them to make difficult decisions.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to medicinally versus recreationally, you and I are both passionately opinionated about these. We talked a lot in the last episode. I talked about my ex-partner being, in the military and probably needing, with PTSD, some version of this. We were just 10 years too late. And so you and I, we're pro use as long as it's safe and effective and understanding your limits. But what's so interesting to me is the motivation aspect of this. It's going to bring down your motivation.
Yes.
And I think that's different about cannabis. Alcohol can certainly, with excessive consumption, make you sluggish, but it is a completely different substance. And so when we think about gateway too, and we talked in that last episode about if I'm an alcoholic and I don't want to be an alcoholic anymore, is it better for me to start using marijuana almost as a gateway out
of it? Right.
And now I may be just changing addictions. I'm addicted to one, now I'm addicted to other. But we do know there are use cases of individuals who are trying this and experimenting with this, doctors who are doing this to see if they can help them get out. But motivation and sobriety, to me, go hand in hand.
Right.
In order to be sober and achieve sobriety, we talk about daily disciplines. We talk about going to the gym. I know you're very passionate about that and kind of who you are and how you show up. And is a substance like marijuana, if it's going to take away my motivation, what's the likelihood of the success rate of sobriety in the event that I am addicted and it's taking away my motivation?
Yeah, I think it can be counter to what you're trying to do, right? It could be something where you're trying to substitute one thing for another, and then you take on a new habit. Again, I feel like you and I say this constantly. It's about individual decisions, balance, and then choosing the right situation to use, and then overuse. We constantly keep saying overuse is the issue, and then we constantly keep coming back to making good decisions when you are consuming a substance, be it alcohol or THC. Don't get behind the wheel. Don't use it in situations where you feel like you're going to have anxiety or it's going to cause panic attacks or issues. So again, I think it's the careful way of using something, even if it's alcohol or it's THC.
Yeah, and we can't fit everything into all of these episodes. And I think daily use and excessive use are interesting when it comes to something like a weed gummy being positioned specifically and strategically for mommy wine culture and things like deep sleep promotion. This is encouraging you to consume this every day as a healthy alternative, but essentially it's leading to a lower tolerance, more consumption, and then things like CUD.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, those the ones that are marketed for sleep use, I think you had mentioned earlier that they actually can impair REM sleep, or it makes it more difficult for you to kind of have restful sleep.
Yep.
So those are the things where I think it's not always marketed the appropriate way, and some of the dangers are hidden behind slick marketing.
Yeah. Do you agree or disagree that use of cannabis do you see it as a straight line to you? I have a reason to use it, I have a reason to use it, so I use it and consume it. Or do you think it's
a good question. So I think it's really individually based, but I think the people that tell themselves that they're substituting one substance for a next to get to a better point in their life, or to a better mental place, or to stop abusing one product for the other, are probably not being truthful with themselves. It's not a straight line, right? It is very dependent on you. It's dependent of the point you are in your life. It's dependent on the other habits. Like, you can't just change one aspect of your life and say, I'm swapping THC gummies for alcohol and that's going to make me healthier. Like, what other decisions are you making in your life to balance yourself from a mental health perspective, to make sure that you're motivated? Are you going to the gym? Are you eating well? Are you balancing your work-life balance? And it shouldn't be a straight path. It's absolutely not. There's no magic bullet. There's no magic gummy. There's no magic pill. It is constant work to make sure you're on the wrong way. And sometimes you fall off the path, and sometimes you have to readjust, but there's absolutely not a straight line to get to yourself to a point where it just makes sense, and a gummy is going to fix everything.
Yeah, and I think we should put that on a bumper sticker.
It'll be a big bumper.
Yeah, that should be a meme. I mean, I feel the same way. We're both connected on this, and I want to talk more about that in an upcoming sleep episode, because I do know that, melatonin, for example, we do have melatonin gummies. I kind of want to do like a comparison between weed gummies and melatonin gummies. Yeah. And I know it's a hormone. I know it's something that's processed in the brain. And your point is, if you have high cortisol, if you have anxiety, if you have health issues, if you can't sleep, what's the underlying issue there? Let's pull that out, that poison out, root and stem, knowing that it's not going to be, the straight line. Yeah. It's going to be up and down and all over the place, but solving from a true wellness perspective is really the key. I think one of the reasons why, to kind of wrap this up for us today, marijuana is so overlooked. It's this thing that we see everywhere. We see weed gummies everywhere. They're so popular. But I think the reason it's overlooked is because there seems to be a lower barrier to entry now.
Absolutely.
They're packaged in this very pretty, beautiful version that we were not used to, even 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
It was much more difficult to obtain it. It was a physical process, and now you can just pick it right off the shelf and pay for it. I do think there are also lower, at least visible consequences. We don't see in society, I think we see marijuana as very bad still, but generally speaking, we don't see the visible consequences. At least I don't think the majority do, like you and I, because we're here at Smart Start representing DUIs and DWIs, where a lot of polyblows are marijuana and alcohol.
Yeah,
would you agree that the consequences seem to be more quiet?
It's very different. So I mean, like we've talked about, I've been in professional sales environments for a long time, and it's a high stress thing. I could tell when people came into work and were hungover. I could tell that, right?
Of course you could tell.
You could see it in their face. You could smell it.
You're a dad.
You knew that, right?
Like, you're still maybe drunk, sir.
Yes, exactly. And that's different now with edibles, right? They consume it, they eat, they have a night, and they come back, and they don't smell like alcohol. The effects are less, at least the immediate effects, right? Now, long-term, that's still to be determined. Also, there's a lot less public incidents. I think inhibitions are lowered with THC, but not to the level of alcohol. You've seen people when they're drunk versus people when they're high, and they seem to behave differently. Like, one's a little bit more reserved and one's a little bit more outgoing. So I think the way that people are acting, so the effects are more subtle, they're more gradual. So you don't really recognize when someone is increasing their use, or you don't really recognize when someone is becoming dependent on something. So the risks are a lot quieter. But it doesn't matter, really. It's still there. There's still some risk. And I guess that comes back again, we keep saying it, to balance and wise decisions.
Yes, absolutely. Impairment is impairment. Consumption is consumption. And tolerance is tolerance. And my mantra, model moderation. And if you feel different, you drive different.
Yep.
So let's get to our Reddit question today. Love our Reddit audience. Thank you always for participating. Izzy, this one is for you. The question is, at what point did your cannabis use go from occasional to something more regular? I didn't even notice this was happening.
Yeah, and I hear that a lot for people that have completely switched over. I mean, both in my college years, my early professional years, even now, as an adult, where you see people switching, and it becomes very gradual. I think you see people start, like we talked about, substituting one for the other because they feel like it's a healthier alternative. And I guess from a health perspective, in some ways, at least the critical organs, the liver, other parts of your heart, your brain, that could be true. But at the same time, you start seeing people increase their usage, become more dependent on it. It becomes more of a daily use type situation. And sometimes, I think we all know college days, you wake up, you remember some that would occasionally use, and then they become people that wake and bake.
Yeah.
And they can't function without that.
It's habit forming.
It is very habit forming.
Especially in the form of a gummy. It's almost like a vitamin.
So easy. Yeah, I was gonna say that. I'm like, it almost becomes like it is a vitamin for them, right? So does it have a placebo effect? Maybe. Are people really dependent on it? I think that's something that becomes very difficult. And I think that's, again, it's the individual, but you really have to ask yourself is, how did I become someone that's increasing the dosage? And how did I become someone that's using this daily? And that's something that really you need to be reflective of, look at and say, hey, like this is going down the right path. It's no longer a release, or it's no longer something I'm occasionally using. It's something that I'm doing on the daily, and I'm also putting myself in situations where I'm taking a gummy and trying to function normally, going to work, driving to school, doing anything that you would do sober. If you're not going to do it when you're drinking, you should not be doing it when you're under the influence of THC.
That's brilliant. Position it in your mind almost beyond just self-awareness and reflection, but treating it almost as you would alcohol. Would I drive? Would I go to a class? Would I do this with this many drinks? And the answer, I believe, would be no for most
Absolutely.
people. And I want to take this opportunity to, Izzy, as a public figure, someone who's out there having these conversations, can you tell the audience today what your position is, again, on marijuana?
Absolutely. Look, I think we've been clear. I've been clear. I am pro marijuana. I believe that it can be something that makes a difference in people's lives. I think there's so many relevant and proven medical studies that show that it can help with things like PTSD, stress, replacement of addiction of one substance for another for addiction. It can help. I've talked about with my grandfather. He is 93 years old, and he started using marijuana very late in his life because he got tired of the pain medications that were not doing anything for him and messed up his stomach.
The elderly crowd love their
They
gummies,
do. They absolutely love it. Yeah,
they
and
really
I think
do.
for him, who are we to deprive him of that relief of pain, right? So I think I'm pro, but again, I don't believe that it's any different as far as the use case of using it safely, not over consuming and putting yourself in situations where you are in control and you're not endangering yourself or other people.
Yeah, and my position as well as a public figure, someone who is the ex-spouse of a partner who did struggle with things like PTSD and military service, someone who could have used probably a medicinal script for some form of cannabis, not just for mental health perhaps, but for pain. I am also pro marijuana. I do not believe that marijuana is evil. I am also pro alcohol use. When it comes to marijuana, whether it's medicinal or recreational, including alcohol, my position is the same. Model moderation. If you feel different, you drive different. And safety is safety first, always.
Awesome. So a couple core takeaways. Cannabis can be habit forming. Today's products are stronger than people expect. Effects go way beyond just feeling relaxed, and then risk builds gradually, not suddenly. So it's a gradual increase.
Yep, the effects are not always loud with something like cannabis, especially the form of a gummy. You're physically consuming it. Your enzymes and your body's going to metabolize it differently, but they're still impactful. What may feel, let's just say, controlled at first is not necessarily always the case. In terms of how you consume it may feel controlled, but it will quickly become routine and quickly become habit forming. Again, no differently than alcohol. And higher potency is going to change the conversation completely. Thank you for joining our episode today. I'm Morgan Ryan.
And I'm Izzy Varela.
You can visit www.smartstartinc.com for more information. If you or a loved one find yourself in a situation with a DUI or a DWI and you're in need of an ignition interlock device, we are here to help you with that process from start to finish for your car breathalyzer. You can also get your first 2 payments free with coupon code Stigma Free.
Or call us at 844-766-0156 for guidance on your personal DUI journey.
Until next time,
Stay safe, drive smart.